Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Practice Pulse podcast. I am your host, Dr. Aditi Agarwal, and I have the pleasure today of sitting down and talking to Dr. George Hariri. Hi, George. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Aditi. How are you? I'm happy to be here on the Practice Pulse podcast with you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so awesome to have somebody like you who has done both. It's a perfect amalgamation of clinical expertise as well as business acumen. So it's really, really cool. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, and I think my clinical expertise, to be frank, it stops with my DMD, right? I think that I went through dental school. I practiced for 2 years, and I think didactically, I definitely have some knowledge to share. But I consider myself more on the business side now, and probably more of the value that I have to offer the audience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, but you know what? The clinical expertise is important. I mean, you kind of have to know how to drill teeth before you know how to save them, right?
Absolutely.
So, I'm so thrilled to have you. You guys, I mean, especially what you do in terms of analytics and metrics and understanding how the business of dentistry actually works and to understand, and you understood really early on that it is truly a business that you have to run, and you can't let the business run you, which it does for a lot of us dentists out there. And how did you get to that point in your career?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to go into business, not into dentistry. But my parents, they were immigrants, and they kind of taught me to go get like a very good degree. And so I was told doctor or dentist, and so I picked dentist because they get to own their own business. And then when I started dental school, I kind of decided that I really wanted to specialize in business. And so I think I'm probably unique in the sense that this has really always been on my mind kind of first almost. And I think that that's been, going through dental school was a really interesting experience because I felt like I was the only person interested in business. And it's just like everyone else just thought if I just did the sim clinic project or just took this test or just did this thing, then that would lead to success. And, I was looking at it, I'm like, man, we have all these loans. Like, how are we going to pay back these loans? And so I think that, that's, yeah, but a lot of people that were my classmates, they've kind of said that throughout their career, they've kind of then realized that they've learned business is quite important. And I think it's one of those things that as dentists, we don't necessarily think it's important and we don't want to deal with it, but it actually is probably really essential to our success.
Yeah. Would you have considered if we had business courses in dentist while we were in dental school that would have helped us be better at what we are doing, at running, our day to day? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, even things like, when we learned about the different types of procedures and you learned about, all the different things that you can do, it would have been nice if there was just like a little like 10-minute, like we learned about a partial denture, for example, and then maybe like a 10-minute thing at the end of like the profitability of partials and like the costs and like just kind of help people orient themselves to the fact that, I think there's a lot of misnomers out there that like people think that maybe like there are certain procedures that are probably just not very profitable, and people think that maybe they're high fee, like that's going to be attractive. But then when you consider how much time it takes and the lab expense and all of that, you kind of realize you're like, man, maybe I'm better off doing something I'm much more comfortable with that I can be doing quickly. And so I think that like we never really got that perspective in school. And so I just think like dripping, some business,
Mhm.
throughout the clinical education probably would have gone a long way for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you, especially now.
Yeah.
Nowadays, considering the climate that we are in, both with the DSOs as well as the private practice, I think the dental students coming out of dental school are so confused as to what is the right path forward, right? And how do we mitigate all our financial burdens that we have and still be able to really serve our communities with the best way possible. So I totally understand and resonate with where you're coming from. Tell me a little bit about, shared practices. You are the co-founder and CFO, and it's, grown to be this amazing sort of uh, DSO, smaller DSO, GPO, and you do a lot for dental practices. Tell me a little bit about how you came together and what it was it, what catalyzed this?
Yeah, so our podcast was started by Richard Lowe back in August of 2016. And, he was starting an Army residency and kind of wished he was in practice management and owned his own practice. And so he started shared practices with angst, wanting to learn everything about the practice management and the business side of dentistry so that when he got out of the Army, he could then go and be a successful practice owner. And then about 8 months in, him and I were friends, and I kind of had been helping him out a little bit behind the scenes with certain resources. And he was telling me that things were quite stressful and that, managing his residency, his at-home life, and the podcast was getting to be a bit much. And so I said, well, why don't I kind of come on and help you out? And so then, that was actually my third year of dental school. So I actually started, and Richard and I became partners when I was a third-year dental student. And then it was really just about turning the podcast into more of a business. And, we started with education, helping people buy practices. We taught a course called the Ownership Accelerator. And then eventually we brought on another partner, Macarino, where we started coaching. And then we brought on 3 more partners when we wanted to go nationwide with dentures and implants offices. And so it was just kind of like a natural evolution of, it was just kind of always trying to grow the business and always trying to figure out like, what's that next thing that's going to take the business to the next level. And so, I think at first it was teaching education, and then it was doing consulting coaching, and then it was, the DSO. But I think we've just kind of always looked for that, that like 10x growth opportunity.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And it's so amazing that you actually figured this out and jumped into it in third year of dental school, where people are barely, keeping their heads above water with all the requirements that we have, at that time. So that is really cool. I mean, hats off to you.
Yeah.
So, and now you're wearing all these multiple set of hats, and shared practices is doing these different things, running a DSO, doing coaching, and the podcast. I mean, it's all still alive. So
Yeah.
how are you maintaining all of it so easily, and and still and still innovating? Like, you guys are still coming up with new things every day and finding ways to make things better. That's what I love about shared practices, to be honest. It's just that you're constantly evolving, right?
Yeah.
And it's just so cool to see.
Well, I mean, the company total has like over 300 people working for it. So, we're a team, right? And there's so many different people between the different partners and everything, where we're able to get a lot done. But, honestly, I think that it's, so when I first joined Richard on the podcast back in 2017, he was uploading at like these weird times. And I was like, Richard, people need to know what to expect. And so like, it was kind of like one of my things very early on is like, we upload on time, every time. And like, I actually am pretty proud of the fact. I don't believe we've missed an episode since I've been here. It's been over 8 years. And it's just like that consistency is something that I think people really need. And I mean, I'll be honest, it hasn't been easy, because when we went from, doing primarily coaching consulting to, opening up a DSO and growing a DSO, it requires a lot of energy to like, grow and scale a dental group. And so, I think it's our attention at times has been kind of split. And I think that has been a real challenge for us. But the thing that, Aditi, I just have a real passion for the practice management education and the philosophy that we have and all of that. And so, people who do seminars with me kind of get a little annoyed sometimes, because I've probably done 10 to 15 practice management seminars for 2 days. Every single time I do a different, I have to rip up the old book and put together a new one, because I can't give the same lecture twice. And so it's just kind of been this natural process of just trying to find better ways to explain things, or trying to resonate in a different way, taking feedback from the audience, taking that feedback. And so I think that Suzanne and I, we just love that iterative process where we've rebranded our philosophy multiple times. We've called things differently. But yeah, I feel like you have to do that. And, one thing, Aditi, I want to make sure we talk about is, I came on in 2017. We're here in 2025, it's 8.5 years later, and dentistry is completely different, right? I mean, you have COVID was a huge thing. You have the hygiene workforce, you have inflation, you have insurance reimbursements, you have the DSOs. Like there's just the whole landscape from when I started to what it is today is entirely different. Add on the technology, and there's even robotics now. So
Yeah.
like it's a completely different landscape
Mhm.
now than it was, when I first got on. And
Trust
so
me, I know.
how,
2003 graduate, man.
yeah,
We've
2003, I can't even
evolved.
imagine. I mean, I graduated in 18, and I feel like it's like from when I graduated to today, it feels like a totally different industry. And so I do think that that's something that I'd like to talk about is, the changes and how to navigate those changes, because practice owners are feeling it. They're feeling the changes, and it's real. Like this isn't easy for a lot of people.
No, absolutely. It's very real. And I completely resonate with you on that. That is change is happening so fast. It's literally the Fast and Furious, I don't know, movie number 25. It's in dentistry.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to keep up because we have not been trained for it in dental
Yeah.
school. And so when you don't have the training, you're trying to understand this. First of all, it's it's as if you've been thrown onto the moon, and you know a little bit about the lack of oxygen, and you know a little bit about the terrain, but you don't know anything else that affects it. And you're like, how are you going to survive? And
Yeah.
it really has become a game of survival in dentistry. And it's kind of mind-blowing to me because, like I said, I graduated 2003. And in the 22 years that I've been in practice, the maximum change that I've seen in dentistry is in these 8 years. So it's mind-boggling, and it's hard, and that's why it's great that the new generation has people like forward thinkers like you, who are trying to understand the landscape and give them information that they need, um, so that they don't lose their footing while
Yeah.
they're taking a step.
And Aditi, I think it's interesting because like, probably when you were in school, it was private practice was the default for everybody,
Yeah,
right? It was you go, you associate, you get a practice, you own,
yeah,
and that's your career.
that's
And
it.
I mean, Aditi, I've talked to more than a handful of people who are making less than half as
Hmm.
an owner that they did as an associate, right?
Hmm.
And so you think about that and you're like, well, I'm going to go into ownership. I'm going to have all the burden of ownership. I'm going to be trapped to this practice, and I'm
Hmm.
going to be making half as much. And I have the debt that got me into the opportunity. Like
Hmm.
it's not the same environment that it used to be, right? And so I think that there's like, season 1 of the Shared Practices podcast was Is Ownership Right for Me?
Hmm.
And that was in 2016. And you have to ask the question again in 2025, is ownership right for me? And there are definitely that group of people that are thriving in ownership, and that has not changed. Maybe they have a little bit more cost than they used to, but like there's plenty of people out there that are making great incomes who love private practice, and it's the right thing for them. But then there's those people that are kind of following that older school advice
Hmm.
and are putting themselves in situations where they're worse in ownership. And
Hmm.
those are the ones that kind of kill me because it takes a different level of intentionality, and it takes a level of intentionality and acumen to
Hmm.
have success in private practice today than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big thing that I'm seeing on my side. I'm curious, what are you seeing on your side? Like, what is changing so much, and what is it like today that is, so different than what it used to be?
Absolutely. I mean, what you just said, because I've been through all stages of being a practitioner. I've been an associate. I am still a startup owner, which is now no longer a startup. And, it's an established practice. I'm actually a multi-practice owner as well. And I am still in private practice, but trust me, the fight that I have to put up today in 2025, and I opened my first practice in 2010 in a depressed market. And the fight that I have to put up today in 2025 is, I would say, 10 times more than what I had to when I opened my startup in 2010, the effort, the putting in the checks and balances, constantly looking at reimbursements and insurances, constantly following up with my staff, even though they're superbly well trained, because obviously they know numbers thanks to practice by numbers. But it is, I'm struggling more now as a private practice owner than I have in 20 years. So,
And what specifically are you struggling with?
well, staffing, of course.
Oh, staffing's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest sort of killers, right? And so that's why we are trying to automate as much as we can, so that we can really focus on patient care, instead of constantly training and retraining new individuals, and make it simpler for people as well, right? I've really come to understand that the barriers in communication styles is different between, say, my generation and the generations that are coming to work the front desk typically. And then because there is so much difference in communication styles, they're not able to effectively communicate with the patients either. And that helps. Automation has helped to actually remove barriers in communication, to be honest.
Wow. Yeah, and it's the Gen Z employee is totally different than the millennial and above. So I think that's something that as well is like an adjustment. But I think, Aditi, from what I understand, we want to make sure to talk about 2026 goals and planning.
Yes, we
And
do.
so kind of transitioning into that topic, I guess.
Tell me about that, right? We're looking into 2026. I can't believe it. What are the biggest shifts that you are seeing in dentistry? And how would you think a practice should sort of set their goals?
Yeah. So, one of the beauties of private practice is the fact that it is the owner's private business. And so it really, I like to start with personal and then have that bleed into the professional, because the practice should serve the person's life who owns the practice. And so, I really think that, you got to start with your goals. What are your income goals? What are your long-term goals? What do you want your office to look like 3 to 5 years from now? How long do you want to be practicing? Are you trending for that timeline to be realistic? Like I kind of like, in December, I like to really take a step back and ask myself the bigger questions. I do what's called Think Week between Christmas and New Year's. And so I really ask myself some of those bigger questions. And I really think that, your plan for 2026 should start with some of those bigger questions. Do I like how much I'm making? Do I like how much I'm working? Do I like, the things in my practice? And really start with objectively your goals. And then from there, it's all about applying those goals to your practice. And that's where practice by numbers is extremely helpful, because if somebody says, I'm making $300,000 per year, and, next year I'd like to make 400,000, and one day I'd like to be making 500,000. Well, great. That means that your practice probably needs to grow. And so you need to look at your practice and say, okay, well, like, where are the growth opportunities? And that's where you can use practice by numbers. And then you can focus on that. And so I think it's like, for me, I always like to start kind of bigger picture, 3-5 years, and then make 2026 like the first building block for that kind of along that path. And one of the big statements, and I'll kind of end here, one of the big statements that I like to make to people is, are you going to be thankful a year from now for what you're doing today? And so, like, you ask yourself that question. You say, am I working on the business? And am I setting a foundation that I'll be thankful for 12 months from now? That's a good assessment for how you're spending your time. And if you're really like putting together a plan for 2026. So you'd say, like, is this plan in 2026? If I do this plan, will I be thankful in 2027 for the work I did in 2026? And my kind of assertion to people is, try to be thankful for the work that you do next year in 3 to 5 years, right? Try to have that be a foundation building year towards some of your bigger goals. So that's kind of what I would, advise people on how to approach a new year.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. Do you have an idea on any key data points that you think that every practice should sort of analyze?
Yeah. So I think the big thing is there's a balance between patient flow and doctor productivity. Right. So, if you say, I'm not as productive as I'd like,
Mm-hmm.
then the first question you should ask is, well, am I in balance? Am I seeing enough patients in hygiene? And am I doing enough exams to be as productive as I'd like? And so, like, I think that understanding that, like, so for example, let's just say you have like, let's just say you're not checking for enough hygienists, but you have a sufficient number of dental assistants and a sufficient number of front office team members. Well, your overhead is going to be high because it's imbalanced, where you're not having enough patients come through to keep the doctor busy, and so that's going to make everything else not be as cohesive. And
Mm-hmm.
so I really think that there's this idea of balance,
Mm-hmm.
that is like, is the practice in balance? Are the number of patients appropriate for the number of doctors? Do we have the correct number of patients for the number of hygienists? And so it's like, using the data, you essentially ask yourself, are we balanced? Are we appropriately staffed? Do we have the number of
Mm-hmm.
patients for the number of providers? Like, I think that that would be some of the first things that I would ask, is assessing the different areas where the practice needs to be balanced.
Yeah, no, that completely, makes sense, right? You have to balance your growth targets with your actual realities in
Yeah.
operations, right? That's like whether it's your staffing or your systems or even your culture, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
It all needs to be work together. I have a question for you. In your book and
Yeah.
the Dental Moneyball, amazing book, by the way. You have it? Oh yes, guys, look at that. George's book. It's really interesting. It has amazing. He talks about turning data into actionable insights, right? So it is so cool. But how do you help practices avoid getting what we call stuck in data overload, right? Because
Ah,
sometimes there is this thing called data paralysis. It's real, it's out there. I mean, a lot of dentists don't like it. How can practices avoid that?
yeah. So, Suzanne, so like I mentioned earlier, every time I teach a seminar, I like iterate in a meaningful way. And so Suzanne, she challenged me and she said that you need to be more tangible, and people want 1 to 2 things to take home with them after a seminar. And I'm like, I'm trying to change the way people think. How am I going to do 1 to 2 things? And so the thought that I had is, I said, okay, well, one thing is the bottleneck. And so I said, I like emphasized this point, bottleneck. Like, I really hammered it in over the 2 days. And the idea of a bottleneck is, it's like, that's the thing that is your biggest constraint towards your goals. And so the paralysis is like, so if you are spending 4 hours a week running your practice, and you're spending 3 hours and 45 minutes on everything that is not the bottleneck, and then you're spending 15 minutes on the true problem, you're not going to make a significant amount of progress. And so it's like, the paralysis by analysis needs to kind of be countered with, well, like, what is our constraint? Because that will zoom you in on a specific area. And one of my favorite things with practice by numbers is how you guys have the percentiles. So, like, for example, if you're in the 75th or 90th percentile, like, you're probably not going to get meaningful change to go to the 95th percentile from the 90th, right? You're probably better off finding a place where you're in the 25th percentile and bringing that to the 75th. And so
Mhm.
it's like, having that focus on, where is my constriction, right? Going back to that idea of balance, where am I imbalanced, and how can I address that? And I think maybe a lot of people, you're going to have a patient flow imbalance, where maybe you don't have enough patients coming in to properly, keep your schedule busy. So you say, okay, well, maybe marketing is going to be a big focus, or maybe retention, or maybe adding more hygiene days, right? Like, those are going to be a focus. Or
Right.
maybe you have the opposite problem, where you're seeing 2 hygienists worth of patients, but you're not busy enough. Well, then maybe your treatment retention and your case acceptance and your presentation and your handoffs, maybe that's going to be your focus. But, like, you kind of have to have an area that you've already pre-described as your bottleneck constraining your growth. And then the paralysis by analysis should hopefully dissipate to focus on the metrics related to the bottleneck. And if it's not related to the bottleneck, then you're probably doing it good enough for now. And I think that that is just a realistic thing that you have to kind of assess, is like, where is my time and energy? And so if you're spending 4 hours a week on your practice, at least half, maybe 2 hours a week, should be focused on the bottleneck, so that you're pushing it forward with your effort. And I think that gets lost in that, when people are paralysis by analysis, they just don't know what to focus on. They don't know their constraints. They don't know their bottleneck.
Yeah,
And
they get lost.
yeah, they need to orient.
Yeah, yeah. It's like you need to push them back into focus. It's like
Yeah.
it gets overwhelming. That's it. It can get overwhelming. So also now in times of growth and change, right? And we touched upon maintaining culture.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about about that.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is there's a realistic expectations that's important to keep in mind, right? If you're growing and you expect your culture to remain unrocked, that's not a realistic expectation, because you're putting more stress on the business with that growth. More patients are coming in every day, more treatment is getting done, more insurance needs to be verified, more insurance needs to be followed up with, right? There's like, with growth comes more of everything, more
Mhm,
staff, more. So it's like more instruments are needed. So there's all these different places where things can break down. And
mhm,
so I think the biggest thing is maintaining culture, is maintaining proper expectations. Our expectation is that things will break, and our team knows that as we're growing, we're growing. And that means that we're going to need to iterate. And so, I think the best advice I could give anybody who's growing and trying to maintain culture is, one, accept the fact and tell your team that things will change and we're going to work on it. I'd set up some type of recurring meetings,
mhm,
because like what happens to a lot of owners is like these problems come in small waves.
mhm,
And if you don't tackle the problem in a small wave, like, this imbalance or this unfairness or something in the team dynamic occurs, then if you don't have a way of addressing it quickly, then it builds into a tsunami, and then you have a team member coming and crying, quitting, and like all of this stuff. And it's like, this problem started 60 days ago, but like
mhm,
it just wasn't addressed, it wasn't acknowledged. And so having a format in which team members can communicate things when they're smaller issues and they can be addressed. So you want to be taking little waves, hitting your shore, rather than kind of a tsunami coming and crashing down. It's significantly harder. So I think it's setting proper expectations, creating a communication environment where team members can bring these concerns and they can be addressed proactively when they're smaller, and being realistic on the fact that, yeah, growth is going to push that. And that's part of the fun of growth. And it's also part of the challenge.
It is. It is. Definitely growth comes with, it's always a dual-edged sword, and you have to
Yeah,
be prepared that it is a
totally.
sword.
Yeah,
You know, you're gonna have fun with it, but then you're also gonna get hurt by it if you're not careful. So it's
absolutely.
it's definitely a balance. So, and finally, if you could give one piece of advice, to any dentist that is sort of doing their goal setting in 2026, what would you
Yeah.
suggest?
So you mentioned Dental Moneyball earlier. So,
Yes.
people come up to me, they hand me the book, and I sign it for them. And literally every single time I've ever signed a copy of Dental Moneyball, I write this acronym in there, and it stands for anything you want in life, nothing off the table. And
Mhm,
so for me, if somebody was beginning setting their goals, I think that oftentimes we can get a little deflated
mhm,
or like kind of beat down from the day to day. And so
mhm,
when we're setting our goals, like we kind of set them from that place of being beat down and not believing and like thinking of all the challenges. And like, I just think that there's a courage to like really saying, all right, I'm going to tell myself the thing that I'm not sure is possible, but I really want.
mhm.
And I think that that would be the biggest advice I'd give anybody setting goals, is like, don't set fake goals, set real goals, and set goals that are hard, that you
Yes.
really, really want, and have the
Mhm,
courage to write it down. And I think that that is, like that's the hard thing to do. It's hard to do that, but that's the first step to it coming true. And so I think that like, having that awareness within yourself to say, I really want this bad enough, even though I don't know how. I think
mhm,
that the fun thing, Aditi, and you and I both know this, is like, how many different ways are there to be successful in dentistry? There's an infinite number of possibilities of how somebody
mhm,
can be successful. I have met people who have incredibly high incomes, and they come in very different fashions. Some people do it one way, some people do it another way. And so it's like, whatever you want in dentistry, there's a way to get it your way. And so
yeah,
that, I think, is like the thing that people don't often think. They think, I need to do it. I need to like do these procedures I'm not comfortable with, or I need to diagnose a specific way that I don't like. And it's like, no, you can just say what you want, and then you can find a way to do it, staying true to yourself. And I think that it's just that courage to set the goal. I think that's where I would start, is like, what if you're starting your 2026 goals, be honest with yourself and think big, and and then see what happens.
yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree with you. Dentistry is a reality of one that you can make your own. Really, you can do the kind of practice that you want. You can be the kind of dentist that you want. You can actually serve the kind of patients that you want. And there's not a lot of professions out there, guys, that can actually provide you with so much flexibility. The flexibility is in your mind, right? How flexible you want to be, it's all up to you. You can be shackled by insurance or not. You can be shackled by your team or not. It's totally up to you. That's what I think. And and it's just about, like you said, setting those hard goals, having those hard conversations with yourself. Is, what do you want? What kind of practice do you want? What kind of a work environment do you want to be associated with, and what kind of patients do you want to take care of, right? And kind of just ask those questions and go from there. I completely agree with you. If our listeners want to hear or reach out to you or learn more about shared practices and what you guys offer and bring, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so sharedpractices.com is a really good place to start. It gives you a complete overview of what we do, and then if you're particularly interested, we do what's called a free practice assessment. And so you can go onto our website to the coaching tab, and then you can do a free practice assessment. And that's really this conversation that we just had is a conversation that you would have with Suzanne, where you say, like, okay, where's my practice today? Where do I want it to be long term? And what's the path to get there? And we give you that clarity in that free assessment. And then if you want to reach out to me, my email is george@sharedpractices.com. You can just send me an email. And yeah, that's how we can help. And I think that one thing I want to say, Aditi, is, so I don't know if you know this, I'm actually starting to write the second Dental Moneyball.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah. So it'll come out at some point next year. So I've kind of been working on that, and it's going to be different in that it's really it's one thing that people really like about shared practices is we help the prospective owner who wants to be an owner but doesn't currently have a practice. And so we're writing a book all about practice acquisitions for that prospective owner. So I'm in the process right now of writing it, and having a lot of fun doing it, but it's going to be it's going to be thick. I think it's coming in a little longer. So it'll be a nice book, and it'll be really targeted for that person that we were talking about at the beginning, that they want to be intentional. They want to have success in private practice, but it's different today than it is, before. And we need to kind of create a roadmap for them today.
No, that's amazing. I wish I had resources like what you are writing down. When I first started my practice, it would have been so much easier, but that's just fantastic. I can't wait to read it. That'll be amazing. So thank you, George.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.